Hi, today I'm going to be talking about some of the origins of social anxiety in those with ASDs. However, some of these things aren't specific for ASDs, but I feel like those with an autism spectrum disorder are more likely or are more prone to committing these cognitive distortions, just based on some of the challenges associated with having an autism spectrum disorder. So the first primary thing, I think, at least for me, is heightened observational ability. Those with ASDs tend to gather more specific detail and information about a scene than those without. At least for me, a majority of the time, let's say if I'm walking down the street, I'm not actually thinking about what I'm going to do when I get home. I'm actually looking at the street and I'm looking at features of the street. My mind is at the level of the detail of the street, but you have to realize that the majority of people aren't at that level. They're not thinking about the street. They're almost in this autopilot zone. They're just heading for the subway. They just want to go home. They're thinking about, what they're gonna eat at home, what they're gonna do, what's the plan for tomorrow. So there are different priorities there. So just in terms of observational ability, if you get nervous and you think you're almost paranoid and you think people think you're weird, that people are going to see that you're doing something weird in public, you just kind of have to reassure yourself that generally the people aren't looking at the same places that you're going to be looking at. They're not as attuned to the details of the physical scene as you are. So you get a lot of these cognitive distortions just from that ability alone. So you have to remind yourself that most people are not thinking about you at all. You're not very significant, as much as your paranoia says that you're significant and that everyone must be looking at you. It's not the case. For instance, so let's say, this is a classic example, if you're at work and you're doing a public presentation, right? And so let's say you're in a meeting and your colleagues are being called up one at a time to do the respective presentations, and of course, you're all nervous sitting there going up. You think everyone's going to look at me. I'm going to slip up on my words. I'm going to draw mental blanks. I'm not going to be able to do this and this. I'm going to forget things. So you have all these anxious predictions. But when you think about it, so you're having all these anxious predictions. Meanwhile, your colleagues are going up to the front of the room giving their presentation. And guess what? You're not cueing in on anything they're doing. Even your other colleagues that are looking at them, I guarantee you a majority of them are probably spaced out. They're not critiquing every movement of the presenter ahead of you. So that's another thing. You just have to reassure yourself that generally people's thoughts are not on you. So, for instance, let's say, I'm always nervous of how I walk. I'll always think people are cueing into the weird way I'm walking or how I sometimes follow them. But you could almost see how the person, they don't. There's not much evidence for them to see that you're walking weirdly. As much as I think that people are noticing, I don't see them turning back. I see them very occupied. They're on their cell phone. They're doing something that, something that's occupying their time. So it's not always correct, the predictions, and you need to challenge them as much as you believe them in the moment. Another major thing is, I think, since people with ASDs have trouble knowing what another person is thinking about, I think that leads almost to this indirect self-centeredness in a way. And to end all this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Those with ASDs, I think they tend to notice the exact thing they're worried about in other people. They will be attuned as to how the person's walking. They're going to be observing the other people. They're going to be observing not looking people in the eye. They're going to see evidence of their traits in other people and how other people are normal in terms of what they're doing, and everything the other person is doing is right and I'm doing something wrong. So the very fact that you have these negative thoughts and you are noticing these things, it leads to you observing these things in other people. So it's just this kind of vicious cycle. You get self-centered, you get rolled up in your own anxious thoughts, and you need to challenge them because they're not always right. So, for instance, a good example is, I mean, this catches me by surprise all the time. I was going to tell my parents about the diagnosis, and I bought all these books. I bought, the all the Tony Attwood books, so I have all these books, and I was hiding them in on a specific shelf. So because I didn't want my parents seeing what I was reading, and one day I left it on my desk, right? And I come home, and I remember I left it on. I remember now that I left it on my desk, and I was freaking out, and my mom had put it back on the bookshelf. So I was thinking automatically, she knows, right? She's read it. She's read the book. She's looking up. She knows exactly, right? This is something I thought. But when I told my parents, I was in my room, and I called them up to tell them, and it was a really strange way to introduce it to them. I called them up, and I say, you know what I'm talking about, right? Like, why I called you up here, like, you've read the books, right? The books, right? And they have no idea what I'm talking about. What books are you talking about? The books. You've read them, But they hadn't. I didn't. My mom's very absent-minded sometimes. So she just picks up things and puts them away, and she cleans. She doesn't even look what she's cleaning at. Right? She throws things away that are important. So I have all this information. And all this backup data that I know my mom's not very observant into the things she's holding. She actually doesn't look at the details of things. For me, when I pick up a book, I absorb how the cover page looks, the author, the title. I absorb all that information, but other people don't. So these are just some of the things. It's just more and more proof that some of my predictions are wrong, and it's hard to have adaptive ways of thinking about those scenarios. But nevertheless, you need to try that. You got to write these thoughts down, and you got to have an adaptive reappraisal of some of these anxious predictions you're making. And I believe that that could help with social anxiety, realizing that your paranoia about other people scrutinizing you is based on false pretenses, based on the fact that other people probably didn't notice. Okay, and let's say if they do, right? Let's say you think of an example of someone that did point it out, saying, okay, you walk weirdly, you do this, right? Now, I do this too. I'll spend some time ruminating. I'll say, oh, that person thinks I'm weird. They're going to think this. They're going to think this. But you know what? It's like when you see a public person. When you see someone on the subway and they're doing something weird, and you go home, and let's say a week goes by, will you remember that person? Not really. You might vaguely, but what's your opinion on it? Does that knowledge of that person's weird affect you with what you're doing now? So even if someone notices this, even if someone notices your oddities, it's not such a priority in their mind to remember that thing. That thought's going to be out of their head. They're going to forget that. You're just a stranger, right? So you have all this evidence against thinking that people are constantly scrutinizing you, and that there are great repercussions, and they're going to think you're weird forever, and some of these anxious predictions. And so, yeah, I mean, that's at least where I'm at. I'm still trying to break through those ideas. It's very difficult. It's one thing doing it while you're in the scene, while you're in action, whereas right now I'm talking about it, and of course it's all logical to me. But when you're in it, it's a lot more difficult to have that proper reappraisal or healthy thought to nullify your negative prediction. It's hard to do that during the moment, and but you have to try. And so yeah, so there's my little collection of thoughts on social anxiety. Thanks for watching.